There was no operating room, no light, no sterile field. There was just one man, two hands, and a bleeding wound. There was no other option. From the testimony of a combat surgeon who served on the front line during the Second World War, France, 1944, inside a foxhole, under fire, without equipment, and he had to save a life. June 1944, Normandy, France. A week had passed since the landings. The beachhead was holding, but the push inland was slow. Every village was its own battle. Every hedgerow was its own line of resistance. And every engagement brought new casualties. Captain James Hartley was the medical officer of the 4th Infantry Division. He was from Ohio. He had finished medical school in 1941. He was 26 when he joined the Army. 2 years of training, combat surgery, sterile environments, equipment, operating room procedures. He had learned all of it, but there were things they hadn't taught him. Nobody had taught him how to operate inside a foxhole. Nobody had taught him how to stop bleeding under fire. Nobody had taught him what to do when the equipment wasn't there. Normandy taught him that. In the first week, Hartley had treated casualties at 3 different positions. The conditions were different every time, but one thing was the same across all of them. There was never enough equipment. Something was always missing. Every time he had to find another way. That morning, a call came over the radio. Serious casualty at a forward position. Evacuation not possible. Under fire. Hartley had to go. He picked up his bag. He knew what was in it. He knew what wasn't. He moved out.
Combat medical officers in the Second World War operated with a standard field medical kit. It contained morphine, bandages, sulfonamide powder, and some basic instruments. But in active combat conditions, supplies ran out or became impossible to carry. This was a recurring reality. In the first weeks after the Normandy landings, the medical supply lines had not yet been fully established. Frontline surgeons were regularly required to go well beyond standard procedures. The methods developed under these conditions became important reference points in the development of modern combat medicine.
When Hartley reached the forward position, the firing was still going. The foxhole was narrow. 2 men already inside. One wounded, one holding him. Hartley bent low and got in, put his bag down. He looked at the wounded man. Abdominal wound. Serious. Very serious. With this kind of injury, every minute mattered, and there was no time here. No evacuation, no operating room, just this foxhole. Hartley checked his hands. No gloves. He'd had 1 pair left in the bag that morning and had already used them. There was no point spending time on something that wasn't there. He got to work. He opened the wound, looked, thought. He knew what his hands needed to do, but every movement here had to be deliberate. Explosions were coming. The foxhole was shaking. Hartley's mind was working, but his hands didn't stop. The soldier beside him asked, "Can you save him?" Hartley didn't answer, because he didn't know yet. But he kept working. Another explosion outside. Dirt scattered. Stone and soil rained down from the edge of the foxhole. Hartley didn't lift his head.
Abdominal wounds were among the most critical and most difficult cases in combat surgery. The infection risk with this type of injury was extremely high, and the time to intervention directly affected survival rates. Sulfonamide antibiotics were becoming more widely available during the Second World War, but their use in frontline conditions was limited. Operating in a non-sterile environment increased the infection risk considerably. Despite this, the emergency interventions carried out by frontline surgeons kept many casualties alive, long enough to reach a proper medical facility.
Hartley stopped. He looked more carefully at the wound. The problem was more complicated than he had thought. There was internal bleeding. Working from the outside wasn't going to be enough. He needed to go deeper. But he didn't have the equipment. He went through his bag. What could he use? This wasn't standard procedure. It wasn't written in any manual. But the manuals weren't here anyway. He made a decision. He would do the best he could with what he had. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't perfect. But it might be enough. Maybe. He turned to the soldier beside him. "Hold the light, right here." Don't move it. The man held the flashlight with shaking hands. Hartley bent over the wound and got to work. Every movement was deliberate. Every decision made in the moment. Left hand holds here. Right hand does this. One step at a time. Sounds coming from outside. Radio, shouting, explosions. Hartley stopped hearing them. He could only see the wound in front of him. His hands just kept moving. 5 minutes passed. 10. The wounded man was groaning. Hartley didn't speak to him. No time. He just worked. 15 minutes later, he stopped. He leaned back, took a breath. His hands were covered in blood. He looked at the wounded man. He was breathing. Difficult, labored, but breathing. He turned to the soldier beside him. "You can evacuate him now. Move fast." The man looked at him. "Did you save him?" Hartley got to his feet. "If he reaches the hospital, he has a chance," he said. He picked up his bag. The radio was going. Another call. He moved out.
The decision-making process in emergency surgical interventions under frontline conditions went far beyond standard medical training. Medical officers like Hartley had to calculate in real time what was possible with the equipment available. These decisions carried enormous weight, both medically and ethically. A wrong intervention could worsen the patient's condition. No intervention at all could mean certain death. The techniques developed by frontline surgeons under these conditions in the Second World War laid the foundations for emergency medicine in the decades that followed.
That day, Hartley received 6 calls. Everyone was different. Everyone brought a new problem. Everyone required a different solution. The second case was a leg wound. A tourniquet was needed. No standard tourniquet available. Hartley used a bandage from his bag. Not ideal. It worked. The third case was a chest wound. More dangerous. Lung pressure. Hartley applied a technique he had heard about somewhere. He hadn't seen it in any book. A colleague had mentioned it once. He didn't know if it would work. It worked. The fourth case. The man had lost consciousness. Hartley brought him back. How exactly? He couldn't fully explain it afterward. "I just did it," he said. The fifth case. The morphine was gone. Hartley worked without it. The man cried out. Hartley paused for a moment, then kept going. The sixth case. The sun had gone down. It was dark. The man holding the light had been wounded. Hartley worked alone, in the dark, working by touch. When night came, he sat in the foxhole. His hands were still covered in blood. No way to wash them. 6 cases. All 6 still alive for now. The radio went off. A 7th call. He got up.
Multiple emergency interventions in a single day were extremely common for frontline medical officers during the Second World War. During periods of active combat, a medical officer could be called to treat dozens of casualties within a matter of hours. This pace was physically and psychologically devastating. Running out of morphine was one of the most critical problems in frontline medicine. Procedures carried out without pain control could be traumatic for both the patient and the surgeon. The alternative methods developed by surgeons like Hartley were later systematized and became part of standard training.
The third week, Hartley had stopped counting. How many cases? How many procedures? How many men? Counting felt pointless, because the numbers never stopped. But some faces wouldn't leave. The second case, the leg wound. Hartley had applied the tourniquet. The man had been evacuated. He had survived. Hartley found that out later. Good news. But the fifth case, no morphine. Hartley had worked anyway. The man had cried out, and Hartley couldn't get that cry out of his head. Medical school had taught him, the patient must not suffer. That was the basic rule. And that day, Hartley had broken it. He had no choice. But the rule was still there, and it still bothered him. One evening, sitting in the foxhole eating, he pulled out his pen. He was going to write a letter. His family was in Ohio. He hadn't written in weeks. What would he say? "Today I performed 6 procedures. I had no equipment. I had to let someone suffer, but they're all alive." He couldn't write that. Instead, he wrote, "I'm fine. Don't worry." He sealed the envelope. He tried to sleep. The cry came back. Hartley opened his eyes, looked up. There was no ceiling, just the top of the foxhole, soil and timber. In the morning, he got up again, picked up his bag, made a note of what was missing. He would put together a supply request. It was going into the 7th week. The list kept getting longer.
The psychological burden carried by combat surgeons during the Second World War was not systematically addressed. Medical officers working in frontline conditions faced extreme physical and emotional demands, working with inadequate equipment, being unable to manage pain, and losing patients due to insufficient resources left deep marks on these men. In the post-war years, most of them chose not to share their experiences publicly. It wasn't medical confidentiality, it was a preference for silence. There was no adequate language for what they had been through.
The war ended. Hartley went home to Ohio. He went back to medicine, opened a practice in a small town. Patients came every day. Broken bones, colds, chronic conditions. Normal things. There was a sterile room. There was equipment. There was light. Everything was there, but occasionally something would happen. When the power went out during a procedure, Hartley didn't stop. The nurse would panic. Hartley stayed calm. He kept working by hand until the backup light came on. Once the nurse asked, "How do you stay so calm?" Hartley thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I operated in the dark in a foxhole in France. After that, a power cut doesn't frighten me." The nurse didn't know what to say. Hartley didn't say anything else either. Years passed. Hartley retired. His grandchildren grew up. One of them went to medical school. Hartley said one thing to him: "Being a good doctor when you have the best equipment is easy. The hard part is knowing what you can do when you have nothing."
The techniques developed by frontline surgeons during the Second World War laid the foundations of modern emergency medicine. Interventions carried out under inadequate conditions contributed directly to the development of triage systems, the establishment of mobile surgical units, and the standardization of field surgery protocols. These experiences were drawn on in Korea and Vietnam. Many of the emergency medicine protocols in use today are systematized versions of the solutions that surgeons like Hartley found in those foxholes under impossible conditions. What men like Hartley learned in those trenches is still alive in operating rooms today.
Hartley died in 1991 in Ohio, at home. Over the course of his medical career, he treated thousands of patients. He ran his practice for decades. His town knew him as a good doctor. Quiet, reliable, steady. He never talked about the war. Once a local journalist came to see him. He was writing about Normandy veterans. Hartley agreed to the interview, but he set one condition. "We're not going to talk about heroism," he said. "We're only going to talk about medicine." The journalist was surprised. Why? Hartley thought about it. "Because in that foxhole, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to be a doctor. Those are two different things." The journalist put that line in the article. When Hartley read it, he wasn't happy with it. It felt out of context, but he never spoke to anyone about it again. When his grandson finished medical school, Hartley gave him something. An old bag, leather, worn, empty inside. "This is for you," he said. His grandson took it. "What is this?" he asked. "The bag I carried in Normandy," Hartley said. "It was mostly empty, but it worked. Remember that." His grandson still has that bag today. Combat medicine is written down in books now. There are protocols, standards, equipment. Everything is available. But sometimes the power goes out. Sometimes the supplies run out. Sometimes a foxhole becomes an operating room. And in those moments, the only thing that matters is this: 2 hands and knowing what needs to be done. Hartley learned that in a foxhole, without equipment, under fire, in the dark, and he never forgot it for the rest of his life.
The legacy of frontline surgeons like James Hartley has never quite received the visibility it deserves in the history of modern medicine. When war heroes are remembered, medical officers tend to stay in the background. But the advances made in frontline medicine fundamentally transformed civilian healthcare after the war as well. Triage systems, mobile surgical units, field anesthesia protocols, all of them were born in those foxholes. Hartley's old bag may look empty, but the foundations of modern emergency medicine are inside it. Sometimes the most important piece of equipment is knowing how to make the best of what you have.